Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Hello. Welcome, Dr. Bayat, to this presentation of yours. Thank you for turning your sound on. So everybody, an introduction to Dr. Bayat. Dr. Vafa Bayat is a research scientist and physician with a diverse diagnostic and basic research training from Baylor College of Medicine and Stanford University in neurodegeneration, genetic diseases, in oncology and pathology. Dr. Bayat has a broad range of professional hands-on experience, and that includes managing complex collaborations on large research projects, financial strategy, business development, mentoring, project development and presentation, and computer and analytical skills. So without much further ado, let's please introduce Dr. Bayat. He has a beautiful introduction. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Good all of you. It's a great pleasure to talk to you today, and especially during this troubling time. So I am going to give a presentation entitled How the Hunt for COVID-19 Emphasizes the Inherent Oneness of the Human Race. First, I'm going to start by introducing myself. So I'm going to go over my training, about my position now at Bitscopic and the exciting work we're doing, a brief introduction to the Veterans Affairs Hospitals, which we work with, and to the Baha'i Faith, which I belong. I'm then going to answer some common questions, such as where did COVID-19 come from? What does it feel like, or what are its symptoms? And when will it end? Lastly, I'm going to address the world's connectedness, including travel and our global village, and address the Baha'i Faith's principle of the unity of mankind. On the right, you can see an image of coronavirus, and I will talk about that a bit more later on. So first, after having lived on 3 continents, Asia, Europe, and America, I began training as a medical student at Baylor College of Medicine. It's a wonderful institution in Houston, Texas. And here was a picture of myself and some of my fellow medical students celebrating a wedding. I then started training as a PhD student. I was part of this combined MD-PhD program, which if anyone's interested in applying to such a program, I'm happy to talk about that later on. And I was part of the Bellin Lab. And you can see here on the day that I defended my thesis, the graduation party that we had afterwards, we're all sitting on the stairs. And one thing you can note as you look at these pictures is the diversity of the group. We had people from all parts of the world in both our medical school class and the grad school class, and it's clear that science and medicine is a global institution, and it is impossible to make advances in medical or scientific arenas without that global cooperation. My thesis project demonstrated that even more, where it was not possible for me to even work on this project with very strong collaboration with Canada. So in Quebec, there were patients that had this disease called RSAL, and it was through that collaboration that we began that project. And then that was added onto by work done in Brazil. So you can see how many authors are part of this this one paper. And that doesn't even capture how many people contributed to the project. So just as with everything, you have to have a lot of cooperation in science these days. And what I loved about this project was how I could show that not only is mankind very closely related, but even the simple fruit fly is closely related to humans, as the gene that was responsible for this disease in people was found in flies, and what actually led to this discovery. So then I graduated from Baylor. I came to Stanford in California, where I trained as an anatomic pathology resident. On the left, on the right, you can see some of the people in our lab. It was a very diverse lab, and I was working as a postdoc. So in both of these pictures, I was in the pathology department of Stanford, and in the pathology department, you study different things like diagnosis of disease, particularly cancer, but also of neurodegenerative diseases. And I gained a lot from that experience. So then I joined a company called Bitscopic. Here I was attending a conference on infectious diseases in Washington, D.C. It's the largest infectious disease conference in the world. It's called ID Week. And here are some of my colleagues at Bitscopic. And at this conference, we heard hundreds of talks and thousands of posters about different infectious diseases, including influenza, Ebola, measles, each of which are making a comeback in recent years. One of the talks I listened to that was very interesting was a talk by Dr. Edward DuPont, who was giving a special lecture, a CAS lecture, and he was talking about future pandemics. And he was saying that when asked by the audience, what is the most likely future pandemic, he said that historically, RNA viruses have been the most dangerous, and all of the recent viruses, Ebola and SARS, were RNA viruses. And so therefore he predicted that it would be an RNA virus. And he was right. After 2 months later, we had this next one. He also pointed out something else very interesting, that because of advances in public health and including the development of potable water, antibiotics, vaccines, that infectious disease, which has been over the past 3,500 years, the most common cause of death, has now dropped below #1 for the past 70 years. So in other words, out of 3,500 years, the last 70 years is the first time in world history that infectious disease has not killed more than other diseases. So the world is making great progress, but as you can see with this pandemic and our global connectedness, that there's a lot more work needed to be done. So at Bitscopic, I've been working since last year. It's a 9-year-old company headquartered in Palo Alto, made of scientists and engineers who use their skills to enhance the VA's ability to rapidly and intelligently detect and monitor the spread of infectious diseases like influenza, the Zika virus, hepatitis C, and now COVID-19. So our group is currently focused on developing an artificial intelligence-based mechanism to identify with high accuracy and in real time cases of COVID-19 throughout the 170 VA medical centers as a supplement to PCR and antibody tests. So this is a very exciting project to be working on, and it allows us to really to help a large hospital system with such a crisis. The VA, some of you are probably familiar with it. It is the largest healthcare system in the country and probably the world. It serves over 9 million patients with over 170 medical facilities. And when I say medical facility, I mean hospitals, because it actually has hundreds of other associated buildings, nationwide and internationally. It serves a large population of veterans that are older, have comorbidities such as heart disease and COPD, a population that is relatively neglected and underserved, with a large percentage of patients who have serious illnesses, including depression, a high rate of suicide, and many other comorbidities. It's a place which I had worked in as a medical student and as a resident, and I really felt that it was valuable. Incidentally, the VA's fourth mission, unknown to many, is that it is the emergency backup health system for a disaster or a pandemic. Because of its size, because of its capabilities, and because of its widespread, the VA is considered as a backup. So it has not been called yet by the government to play that role so far, but it is preparing for that possibility. So the fact that the VA sees so many patients every year allows it to also have very good surveillance of diseases. And so the CDC uses the VA health data in order to monitor how other pandemics like influenza are spreading, because it has so much information all in one place. And so its role in monitoring this virus around the country and around the world is critical. I'm also a member of the Baha'i community. The Baha'i community is worldwide, with members in every country and locality in the world. It was founded in 1844 in Iran, and its purpose is the unification of the human race and the birth of a golden age, a global civilization where equity and justice, the equality of men and women, universal education, and the recognition of the inherent oneness of mankind in all aspects, from religion to race. Here is a nice picture from our community here in the Bay Area from last summer, when social distancing was not yet being done, and people from all over the Bay Area came together to discuss these principles. So I'm going to address some common questions now about the coronavirus called COVID-19. So why is this virus, first of all, called a coronavirus? So coronaviruses were discovered starting in the 1960s, and there are now 7 of them. This is a transmission electron microscopy image of a coronavirus using a special dye. And when scientists first looked at these viruses under TEM, they noticed this ring or halo or crown around the virus. And so they referred to it as a coronavirus. There are 7, as I mentioned. 4 of them are seasonal. They occur every year, usually in wintertime. And then there are 3 more recent ones. One is called SARS, which appeared in 2003, MERS, Middle Eastern Respiratory Syndrome, and the third one today is COVID-19. So what does COVID-19 feel like? First, everyone is affected by COVID-19 differently. Some are affected very mildly, some are affected very severely. But early studies of patients in Hubei showed that in declining order, the most common symptoms are fever, a dry cough, fatigue, shortness of breath, muscle aches, headache, sore throat, chills, diarrhea, and nausea and vomiting. But you can have any combination of these and none of the other symptoms. So it's going to vary a lot. It seems that the older you are and the more comorbidities you have, such as asthma, such as high blood pressure, the more likely your symptoms will be more severe. It seems that children are affected much less, but no one should think that because you are younger, you will not be affected. In fact, in places like New York, like Italy, Hubei, we've seen that actually half of the hospitalized ICU patients are under the age of 50. So, next question is, how and where did COVID-19 start? It's not often known early on where a novel virus first appeared. So, although the first patients documented for the virus were in Hubei, where my wife is from, we don't always know. For example, the Spanish flu pandemic of 1918 was originally reported in Spain. However, it was later determined most likely it arose in the Midwest in America. So only time will tell where this virus first appeared, and that takes a whole field of that will require testing of old blood samples from the past year all over the world, because until a new virus is discovered and reported, no one has ever even known of its existence. So it will take time for us to know. But so far, it looks like the first outbreak was in the city of Wuhan. So it was found in a hospital when some doctors noticed that there were a bunch of patients who were very severely ill and had SARS-like symptoms. When the sequence of the virus was first reported on January 7th, I studied it that day, and I became very concerned because first, the virus sequence was extremely similar to the SARS virus of 2003. Second, its sequence also had polymorphisms or mutations that indicated its ability to transmit between humans efficiently. So it had certain mutations that are found in normal human seasonal coronaviruses. So I became concerned and I wrote an article on LinkedIn that month, and you can read it, it's available. So the next question is, are COVID-19 cases dropping? So here is a map from the World Health Organization yesterday, showing the number of cases reported in the past week all over the world. So you can see that the whole map is blue, with different countries having different shades of blue. This indicates that the virus is everywhere, and therefore it's spreading through these communities around the world, and it's doing it at different rates. So everywhere is different, and the ability of the virus to transmit depends on the density of people, about the travel restrictions that might be in place, about where the cities are located, how many initial cases that area had, the health infrastructure, and so on. It depends on the number of cases that are tested. So there's a lot of unknowns. But it does seem as if wherever there has been social isolation, social distancing, uh, we have seen a flattening or declining of the epidemic curve. So it's a very a positive sign. However, as time has gone by, because of the virus's uh, infiltration into every community, when that social distancing is stopped, we could see a big surge, unfortunately. And also, just because an area goes down doesn't mean that it won't go back up. So in places like Japan and Singapore, which managed to halt their outbreaks quite early on, we're now experiencing resurgences with record numbers of patients every day. So the answer is an uncertain no. Cases are not dropping. In many parts of the world, they're rising very fast. But it seems that efforts to social distance have been beneficial. This figure, this world map, also demonstrates that you cannot stop the virus in one place in the world, but allow it to grow without limits in another part. The world is so connected. Just consider that my wife is from the province where it started, in Hubei. And I was watching in January my parents-in-law locking themselves up in their apartment in Hubei, and it couldn't have hit closer to home than that. And so when to other people, Wuhan or Hubei seemed so far away, to me, it seemed very, very close. Another common question is, does this COVID-19 virus live on food? So the risk of catching this virus from food is thought to be very low, although it's not impossible. For the main reasons, the food industry has become very careful about food safety and the ways to eliminate the spread of foodborne illness. They have dozens of different ways of making sure that viruses and bacteria do not enter the food that we eat. However, they cannot catch everything, and sometimes they don't, and we have these food outbreaks. Immediately, though, after an outbreak starts, the food is destroyed and new batches are created. Also, when you cook this virus, you destroy it. We still don't have a perfect handle on what temperatures are required. It seems a study in France showed last week that if you heat a liquid like tea or something to 140 degrees Fahrenheit, the virus is damaged. Also, acid seems to destroy most viruses. So the stomach acid that you have will most likely destroy this virus. But regardless, to be careful, you should wash your hands, wash fruit and vegetables, exercise good hygiene. But virus spread is most likely not via food. It's most likely from aerosol and respiratory droplets. So places which have very dense populations where people are living under the same roof in small compartments, such as prisons, such as cruise ships, in hospitals. These are the most likely places that the virus will spread fast. So these are places to be careful about. Another question is, when will the COVID-19 pandemic end? So it is unknown when it will end, but I think most likely it will occur when there is sufficient public or herd immunity to the virus. But there are several big difficulties towards the developing herd immunity, and may mean that this may take many years before it subsides. The reasons are as follows. coronaviruses are not immunogenic. They are difficult to develop vaccines against any of them. That's why a vaccine for the seasonal coronaviruses, which affect millions of people every year, have not been developed. They're not being sold. So that's why a SARS vaccine was so difficult to develop, even though we all knew how important it was. Second, the respiratory tract has low access to the immune system. Even if you've had the virus before, even if you are technically immune, even if you've been vaccinated, your respiratory tract, especially your upper respiratory tract, cannot be reached by your immune system very well. So even if you are vaccinated, you could still catch it, no problem. Third, it may take 18 months or more to develop a vaccine. And because of its low immunogenicity, it's quite possible that people could be reinfected repeatedly by the virus. In fact, it's well documented now in China, in Japan, that people who've had this virus, they either caught it again from somebody else, but more likely the virus reactivated, because even though they had the infection, their immune response may not be enough to keep it completely at bay. So it came back. So there's a lot of concerns about this, and therefore it will require a lot of collaboration globally, not just in the public health field, but also in the medical and scientific field, to develop the best treatments, the best vaccines possible. This is a terrible virus. Next, I will just address the fact that our world is so interconnected. This is a figure from a financial paper, actually, in showing the industries in different parts of the world. And the lines represent the amount of connectedness between each of these industries. And you can see clearly that every industry in every part of the world is closely connected to every other part. You cannot disentangle this. And it is becoming more interconnected every day. So just one example of how interconnected we are between, for example, China and the US, that 500,000 people flew from China to the US during the month of January alone. So it's no wonder that this virus spreading in a town in China called Wuhan. Actually, it's quite a big city. It's got 10 million people, but could spread globally so quickly. So we are very connected. So I mentioned before that I am a Baha'i, and one of the founders of the Baha'i Faith, his name was Abdul Baha. He came to Stanford University in 1912. The school was shut down. Actually, this pandemic has shut down Stanford for only the second time in its history, completely. The first time was when Abdul Baha visited Stanford, and the president of the school asked everything to be closed so that they could listen to Abdul Baha's talk. And his talk, near the end, he says, "As this is true of material phenomena, how much more evident and essential it is that oneness should characterize man in the realm of idealism, which finds its expression only in the human kingdom. Verily, the origin of all material life is one, and its termination likewise one. In view of this fundamental unity and agreement of all phenomenal life, why should man in his kingdom of existence wage war or indulge in hostility and destructive strife against his fellow man? Man is the noblest of the creatures." So he was saying this to these professors and students in 1912, a few years before the greatest war, World War I. And of course, he knew this, and he was preparing Europe and America for that possibility, and warning us about war. It was called the Greatest War because at the time nobody could have imagined that there would be another war, another world war, which there was in the 1940s. So Baha'u'llah wrote. Baha'u'llah is the father of Abdul Baha and also the founder of the Baha'i Faith. He wrote, "It behoveth man to adhere tenaciously unto that which will promote fellowship, kindliness, and unity." So here is our guidance. How can we eradicate this pandemic and all of the other threats to our world? By promoting fellowship, kindness, and unity, by focusing on our essential oneness. But it's impossible to promote the oneness of mankind without addressing the oneness of religion. That all religions come from God. Before I started medical school, I served in Haifa at the Baha'i World Center, and at the foot of the terraces of the Shrine of the Bab is this area here on the left, which is where the inauguration of those terraces occurred. So here, a few days ago, representatives of different religions came to this area in front of the Baha'i Gardens to pray for the end of this pandemic. So here we have this statement from Abdul Baha from when he was speaking in Paris. "The day is coming when all the religions of the world will unite, for in principle they are one already. There is no need for division, seeing that it is only the outward forms that separate them. Among the sons of men, some souls are suffering through ignorance. Let us hasten to teach them. Others are like children, needing care and education until they are grown, and some are sick. To these we must carry divine healing." So, in summary, in order to fight this pandemic, in order to reduce the number of people who become sick, in order to find new cures and new vaccines, it is imperative that we all work together. You cannot have a leg or a foot with gangrene and ignore it, hoping and thinking that it's your foot. It's not going to affect your heart. It's not going to affect your brain. It's not true. So we have to treat all of the people of the world as our own family. We have to make sure that each of them is taken care of. Otherwise, whatever they have will come to us. So Baha'u'llah, in a letter to Napoleon III, he wrote, "Regard ye the world as a man's body, which is afflicted with divers ailments, and the recovery of which dependeth upon the harmonizing of all of its component elements." I really like this picture because it's of my friends in Haifa, because it was taken shortly after I left. So I can recognize a lot of the faces in this picture. So with that, I'm going to close. Thank you. And I'm going to take questions.
Hello, so Dr. Bayat, can you hear me? Yes, you can.
Yes,
Good.
thank you.
So there's a question regarding drinking hot liquids. Will it sterilize the throat from the virus? Will you be cleaning your throat from coronavirus if you drink hot liquids or like, hot lemon water and stuff like that?
That's a great question. So remember that the concept of sterilizing means that there is some virus in your mouth, right? Or in your throat. So the first, most likely, drinking something very hot is first going to burn you. So burning you is a terrible thing and will just make you more susceptible to infections. So I would avoid drinking anything that's too hot. And but that's only if you ate something, I think, or drank something which had the virus. The virus is spread by respiratory droplets. So drinking anything hot will not affect it because it goes into your sinuses, your nose, it not in the digestive part of those organs. So no, I wouldn't recommend drinking hot things.
Thank you, Dr. Bayat, for that answer. So actually on that realm, the virulence of the coronavirus, the ability for it to spread, you spoke quite a bit about it in that if you get infected with it, you can potentially get reinfected and how hard it is to make a vaccine. What do you think regarding the virulence of the coronavirus that makes what we do all the more important?
Sorry, makes who do?
We as in humanity, individuals and collectively, in regards to the virulence of this virus, like that it's so high.
Right. So, in the Baha'i Faith, we read that we should pay attention to what scientists and doctors say. So they should be respected and listened to. So every disease is different, and every disease requires a different treatment. This virus is very different from others that we've dealt with. So therefore, it will require a different therapy. So it cannot be fitted the same way. So the scientific and medical communities have said that since we don't have a vaccine, since we don't have a treatment, the only way to slow the spread, which is very fast, we can go into discussions of R0s and stuff later if you like. Because it can be spread very fast, the only way to limit the spread at this point is to isolate ourselves from other people. So far, that is the only way to slow this down. So I think as humanity, we should first listen to what they are saying. They're not God. They make mistakes. They may not know the future. They may not know the correct answer, as they say, but they're all we've got. They are at least the ones who understand the virus the best. So we should just pay attention.
So we got a question, and the question is, how should governments approach relaxing the current social distancing policies? And what data would they need to base these decisions on?
Yeah, this is something it's a great question. I have the same question, actually. I think about it every day, and I don't think there's a really good answer for it. I don't feel that personally, this is my personal opinion, is that we are at a very perilous moment. That the virus has now infiltrated every town on Earth and is affecting people largely asymptomatically currently, but they are infectious. So reducing social distancing could cause, in my opinion, one of the greatest crises of all time, where those infected people who may not be showing symptoms right now would be able to spread the virus in their workplaces, in their families, and their communities extremely rapidly and overwhelm the whole medical infrastructure and lead to what I had described earlier, as the VA becoming the backup plan for the health system. So unfortunately, although everyone hates this social isolation, and it's devastating to the economy and to our jobs and so on, the alternative, opening it up, may result in a disaster that we've never seen. So I would be cautious about such a thing. But the government, public health authorities, they have to find some kind of medium to restart things without causing huge numbers of deaths.
So another question are there other viruses that may attack this virus? Like, for example, viruses that attack other bacteria? Like, is there a way we could use some other pathogen to fight this?
I'm not aware of anything which attacks it in that way. The most likely way to treat this is using molecules that bind to certain proteins that the virus produces that are essential. So nucleotides, nucleotide analogs, and so on, which have been developed for Ebola, for influenza, for other viruses, may prove useful for this one. But as for a pathogen which attacks it, I'm not aware. Some viruses cooperate with each other, like hepatitis B with hepatitis D, and they're essential for each other's propagation, but I've never heard of a virus attacking another virus.
So a friend from Nebraska, Alex Clark, is asking 2 questions. Dr. Bayat, what do you think are some steps the world can take to prevent a pandemic like this from happening again? That was the first. And second, is there a significant chance that the virus could mutate in the coming months, such that most victims will experience serious symptoms, regardless of age or comorbidities?
Right. So how to prevent another pandemic? First, you need very good biosurveillance. A lot of the world is neglected medically, and we don't even know what viruses are spreading through those communities, like refugee camps and so on. We need to know what is happening on the ground all over the world. Like I was saying earlier, you cannot have a foot which has gangrene and ignore it, hoping that it will not affect the rest of the world, the rest of the body, because it's on your foot. Everywhere needs to be monitored. Viruses need to be documented in every hospital in the world so that we can become aware of new things. Currently, even in America, if you have a viral illness and you go to the hospital and they do a battery of PCR tests to determine what virus you have, 70 to 75% of the time, they will not even have an answer. It means 3/4 of the time in a normal year, we don't know what virus is affecting you, even though we're testing for dozens of them. So that's what I was saying earlier. We don't know when this virus started, because it was first detected in December, but it could have been existing for months before that in Hubei or somewhere else. So could you just ask me the second part of that question again?
Sure, one moment, let me pull it up. Okay. Is there a significant chance that the virus could mutate in the coming months such that most victims will experience serious symptoms, regardless of age or comorbidities?
Yes, so viruses constantly change. The ones which change the fastest are RNA viruses, like this one. Coronaviruses are a type of RNA virus. And each time they evolve, they can affect the population differently. If you look at 1918, the Spanish flu pandemic, the first wave was very mild. People's symptoms were very mild comparatively. The second wave that occurred later in the summer was very severe. It killed 3 or 4 times as many people as it did in the first wave. So viruses are constantly changing. Influenza is the best example. That's why every year we need a new vaccine, because the strains that are circulating in mankind change every year quite a lot. This virus is changing very fast. In fact, 1% of its whole nucleotides have changed since the virus started in December. So there are now, you can trace every viral strain that that someone's infected with all over the world, and know where it was before that, where it was before that, and so on. This virus is constantly changing. And in that article in LinkedIn, I was already mentioning that there were 2 mutations that had now been found in the virus that made it more transmissible between humans. So there is no doubt that this virus will continue to evolve as fast as it can, and we will have a serious struggle to have. I see a lot of questions in the chat. Hopefully we can address a few more.
So another question that was asked was about using regular dust masks. Can they be used to block this virus?
So N95 masks are most likely the best ones to slow the spread. It seems that some masks are better than others, but you should remember that most of the time, the mask does not protect you from catching the virus from somebody else. The mask protects you from an infected person who's wearing the mask. Does that make sense? The mask protects people around an infected person.
Yeah, can you explain that a bit about how it protects others from you when you wear a mask? So people understand that it's the other way around, not what they think. People think they'll get protected by putting a mask on from other people, the other way around.
So respiratory droplets are very small. They're very hard. It's very easy for them to travel through the air. But a cloth with very fine fibers can stop that respiratory droplet from entering the air from an infected person. So the virus, even it's been shown, can be spread not even through coughing. It can even spread through breathing. Okay, and wearing a mask stops the droplets in the air that you are breathing from entering the air around you that could possibly infect others. But you should also bear in mind that a mask only stops air from traveling into your lungs. It does not stop droplets from entering your eyes or other parts of your body. It doesn't prevent them from getting on your skin, and the skin is constantly spreading viruses from one part of your body to the other. So it's very difficult to stop this spread, and it's demonstrated best by doctors and nurses in hospitals with infected patients. They can be wearing a full bodysuit with a face shield and everything, and wear it every single day and still catch this virus. That's why the numbers of doctors and nurses who have died during this pandemic is so high. and they were wearing full body suits. So that is why, even if the whole population wears masks, and it may not be enough, that's why governments decided that social distancing was so essential.
So on that same thread, there was a question asked from Jane. What do you do to protect yourself if you need to leave your home? We know washing hands with soap and water. We know to wear PPE and social distancing. So aside from social distancing, wearing PPE, washing hands with soap and water, what else do you need to do to protect yourself?
I think you should just be cautious about what you touch. I think you should stay away from large groups of people, particularly in places with low ventilation and so on. I looked at this study yesterday that showed the diagram of a restaurant. A lot of people who came out of this restaurant on the same day later went to the hospital and were found to be infected with COVID-19. And so a study was done of the restaurant and where the people were sitting during during that day, that restaurant. And they discovered that anyone who was sitting upstream or downstream of the AC units in the restaurant became infected. People who were sitting even at the table next door, the table next to it, but were not in the stream of the AC, didn't catch the virus. So basically, wherever an AC unit is pushing air from an infected person towards you is somewhere to avoid. So it's much, much safer to take a walk in your neighborhood than to walk in a hospital or in a restaurant or a grocery store where air is being circulated from one person to the other. That's what I would say. So just be careful about what you touch. If you touch something, a door handle or something, use a napkin or gloves. Discard those gloves safely, and just be sensitive.
So Edgar from St. Pete, Florida asked, are there people that have developed antibodies as a result of recovering from COVID-19? And how do we know, or how will we know if they did?
Right. So unfortunately for this virus, it does not seem that immunity is very strong. I wrote in that LinkedIn article a bit more detail about immunity to this virus, because the virus infects certain types of cells called T cells. T cells are very important for our immunity, and it causes them to decrease in number. And through this mechanism, and many other mechanisms probably, including with cytokines and so on, the virus suppresses immunity, suppresses it. So your ability to produce an antibody response or an immune response in general to the virus is decreased. The virus is protecting itself from you. So as a result, immune responses are generally weak. In fact, many people who have been infected were no immune response was detected in them. They couldn't find antibodies against the virus, even though the person recovered. But in general, the immune system is very good at fighting all invaders. So a lot of people do develop immune responses, and those responses will protect them from the virus again. And there are therapies being developed that use antibodies generated from patients who've recovered. And although we don't have much data on it, I'm pretty sure it will be effective, but we'll just have to see.
Okay, 2 questions from Barbara from Montana. Sorry, we took a while to get this question out. What about taking vitamin C and antiviral herbs and eating antiviral foods, if there are any, to get rid of the virus, like bupleurum root, dandelion root, let's see, golden seal, etc.? That's the first question.
Okay, I'm going to quickly try to address that. First, I'm not an expert on these types of foods. However, as Baha'u'llah said, in the future, we will be able to treat disease with foods. Once we understand exactly the causes of that disease and what makes it worse, we will be able to identify specific foods that will help us fight that disease. So of that, there is no doubt. My experience with foods and disease has been mostly in the area of mitochondria and autophagy. So in my thesis project, I showed that using vitamin E and N-acetylcysteine was able to reduce the symptoms of my fruit flies from that disease I described. In my work as a postdoc, I looked at certain foods and certain drugs which promote autophagy, and I found that they also improve symptoms. So I am pretty sure, I'm convinced that anything which promotes autophagy would be beneficial. That could include fasting, that could include certain foods, and it could also include avoiding certain foods, like high-fat foods, which inhibit autophagy. So I'm sorry I can't go into golden seal. I don't know enough about these things, but I do know from a class I took in medical school where I looked into alternative medicines, that each of these herbs and so on have hundreds, if not thousands, of active ingredients, most of whom we don't know what they do. But most modern medicine has come from ingredients taken from plants or fungi. And the more we learn about foods, the more amazing they are. I give one example, honey. Honey has been used by bees for 300 million years to feed their young, their larvae. And scientists now know that not only is honey very nutritious, it also is an antiviral, an antifungal, and an antibacterial. And that is why bees have been using it for so long, because it protects their young from all disease. Not only does it feed them, it also has components which protect them. So if you just take this one example of honey, which the medical community has recognized its usefulness to the extent that some patients with burn injuries and skin infections have been treated with bandages with honey on them, with benefits. So I'm sure that a lot more will be found.
Okay, and just a quick reminder for everyone who's here, we've slated this for questions to go to 12:30, and at 12:30 we're ending. So if you want to drop off, it's perfectly fine. We're going to be answering all the questions of the individuals who have asked questions throughout this presentation. So the second part to that question was about taking vitamin C. No, that was the first question. Sorry. Second part of that question was, so if a person has had this virus but seems to be recovered, can it be contagious? You had mentioned in your speech how that it's possible they can reinfect themselves. What about infecting others?
Yeah, we don't have data. There is no data on whether a recovered person can infect somebody else. I have not seen any reports of that. What we have seen is that people who had the virus, who the levels of the virus in their blood went down to undetectable levels, later became detectable again. So most likely the virus infects some cells and it's kind of for a while, and then the levels can come back up. We just don't know if that means the person is infectious. I doubt that they are infectious though, because the spread of the virus is mostly through the respiratory tract, through breathing and coughing. Even if the levels in the blood increase above the detection level, that's not going to affect 99% of transmission, which occurs usually in the first 7 days after infection. Regarding the question about vitamin C, we don't know yet. In places like New York, they are giving IV vitamin C to a lot of their patients. And so we will know very soon if it was helpful. But it requires a randomized clinical trial in order to determine that. But there are a lot of these going on. I would bet, though, that it is going to be helpful. Vitamin C is known to reduce the length of a viral respiratory infection by a day. So if you have a cold and you take something like Emergen-C, it's well known that if the virus lasted 5 days without vitamin C, if you take it, it will last 4 days. So your infection will be shortened by that amount of time. And it's because vitamin C, which is a vitamin, and therefore is an essential food that for your body, it can help you recover. It can help your immune system recover. It can help your stem cells replenish. It can help you clear your infection. So I would take it. But the actual data on how it affects this virus is not yet out.
So Philip from New York asked this question. What is the status of antivirals and which are more promising, or which is most promising from all of them?
Right. So there are a lot of antivirals that are being tested. There are some which are already approved for other conditions like HIV or influenza that are being tested on this specific application. Because the virus uses the ACE2 receptor, which is found on the respiratory tract, in the GI tract, and so on, ACE2 inhibitors, which are used for hypertension, are also being tested to see if they help reduce the amount of infections. Then there are other drugs like hydroxychloroquine, which is an anti-malarial drug that was discovered like hundreds of years ago, like 300 years ago, that it was useful in British soldiers who were catching malaria in India, that it also suppresses this disease. But most likely hydroxychloroquine works by suppressing the immune system. And it was found to be beneficial with SARS because it suppressed a strong, aggressive immune response. However, that might not be good in this case. Because hydroxychloroquine affects the heart, in patients that have heart disease, it may actually be detrimental. But we don't know yet because there's a lot of conflicting data on it. So we'll have to see. The World Health Organization has the most hope in a drug called remdesivir, which is a nucleotide analog which prevents the virus from replicating in the cell. So the way it works is that the RNA polymerase is producing a longer and longer RNA strand, and then this nucleotide analog gets inserted at a location in the virus, and the virus virus particle never finishes, so it cannot continue replicating. But we're still waiting for a randomized clinical trial for remdesivir. The world is waiting for that. There are other drugs, Avigan, which is showing promise in Japan, but we're still waiting for clinical trials to support that. There are other drugs as well, lopinavir, which has had mixed results. I'm not involved in these clinical trials. I just look at what the results show. So we'll see. I think there is promise, but we may find more in the coming days.
So we had a question actually about remdesivir and hydrochloroquine. You answered that. So I'm not going to ask that again of you. However, there is a related question to that about there being, if there is there any provisional FDA approved testing that can be used to determine if an individual has the virus or had it prior and has recovered?
So there are FDA approved PCR tests, which allow you to determine if you have the virus. There is a protein-based test that was approved recently that allows the doctor to detect whether the protein of the virus is present in your blood. And there are antibody tests, which are still in the testing phase for determining if somebody had the infection. The problem, though, is that antibodies always have a high false positive rate because the body produces antibodies against everything, and they can be random things in your environment. It will produce an antibody for. The fact that there are 4 seasonal coronaviruses, which all have similarities to this virus, means that one doctor's test might say that the person had been infected with COVID-19, but another might say, no, it's not, because that antibody was actually against this other seasonal coronavirus. So we don't have a good answer about who has been infected or who has not. Time will tell, and hopefully this false positive rate will go down. But like I said earlier, the immune response to this virus is weak, very weak. And some people come away from the virus with no detectable antibody response. So we don't know, but hopefully time will tell. A study was reported 2 days ago in the county next to us, Santa Clara County, where they tested large numbers of people for antibodies, and they concluded that 40 to 80,000 people in the county out of 2 million had been infected over the past 3 months. But there's a lot of debate over the last couple days about whether those results are meaningful because of that high false positive rate, and time will tell.
So the other question, going back to the vitamin C one, just really quick. So it doesn't keep convoluting right and left. Does Zicam really work on colds? If so, why doesn't it work on other coronaviruses?
I'm not familiar with Zicam. I'm sorry. Can't comment.
Okay, great. The other question is, there are, and this is from Clearwater, Florida, there are many millions more of viruses. There's millions and millions of viruses, and only few of these viruses have actually affected humanity. What are the chances that we have a pandemic more often?
Yeah, so viruses have existed since the first cells existed. And it's estimated that 3 or 4 novel RNA viruses are discovered every year. So if COVID-19 was discovered in December, we can be pretty sure that 3 or 4 more new ones will be found by the end of 2020. So there's always this great threat of a new viral pandemic. It was one of the reasons that as a medical student, I was very concerned about H5N1, which was a bird, it was called bird flu at that time. And I helped encourage the creation of a website called Flu Trackers, which is based in Florida actually, and which tracks all viruses around the world in all languages. And it was what actually alerted me in early December to the possibility that a SARS-like virus had appeared in Wuhan. So it was around the time of that ID Week conference that I first heard the stirrings that there was a strange level of viral illness in Hubei. So those types of efforts will alert people to future pandemics. And you can pretty much guarantee that there will be more. And each of them will have different flavors. For a virus to become a pandemic, it has to be easily transmissible. This virus has an R naught somewhere between 2.5 and 6. So that means that everyone who catches it in their normal life would be able to infect 3 to 6 other people. So that's how pandemics start, when you have a lot of people being able to infect a lot of other people. Influenza has a much lower R0 of about 1. Measles has a very high R0 of about 20 or 30. That's why people are very concerned about measles, making a huge comeback in the world. And part of the discussion at that conference by all these infectious disease experts was the concern about influenza outbreaks in New York City, which were really devastating. Yeah, I can guarantee you there will be more. But each time one happens, the world is better prepared, more united, acting more synchronously, hopefully, and more cooperatively.
So in tying what you just said about the world working in synchronization with one another, how can we tie in the Baha'i principles that you believe that can help become a solution to these problems? And as the previous question asked, because these pandemics are bound to happen once more, avoiding the effects of the pandemics as we've had them now.
Right. Well, we have to first accept that the world is one, that everyone, wherever they are part of our human family, and therefore have concern for any of them. These outbreaks, these pandemics, usually start in places which are neglected, places where we have no surveillance, places with very poor public health, ability. Usually places which have often civil war or refugees or so on. It's not a surprise that the latest threat just before this one of Ebola was so high in a place like the Democratic Republic of the Congo, where they had had a civil war for decades, and people were poor and hungry, and conflict was constant. I had a friend who sang with me at the World Center in 2002, who had come from the Congo, and he was saying he had wanted to marry a girl from a neighboring tribe, but because of the conflict that had been ongoing for so many years, he was unable to meet her family. Eventually, he was able to, and they did get married. But it just shows that places like that, it's not only terrible for the people there, it's terrible for the whole world, because a virus is just one plane ride away.
So a question was asked from Philip of New York. What are the assumptions behind the estimate of 2 to 3 years for herd immunity?
Right. So herd immunity is believed to occur after a certain percentage of people have had the virus and are immune. So that's why it's called herd immunity, because when most of the members of the herd, they're using an animal analogy, are protected, the babies of the herd, the infants who were not infected, become partially protected. So that's where the concept comes from. It usually occurs when about 60% of a population has had the virus before. So 40 to 60%. So the reason that they say 2 to 3 years is because they think that it will take that long for 40 to 60% of the population to catch this virus, because it will spread through the population over time. However, that that data may not be accurate, because first, the virus reduces immunity in people. It lowers the lymphocyte number through different mechanisms, and therefore, even if you've caught the virus, you may not be immune. So that may not be helpful. Second, it's hoped that when a vaccine becomes available, which might take 18 months, it will take a lot of time and a lot of resources to produce the vaccine and have it used globally. That type of undertaking, global production of a vaccine in a very short period of time, has never been done. In fact, it takes a huge factory that a big US company made just to be able to produce a vaccine for 20 million people. Imagine how much resources would be required to produce a vaccine for 7 or 8 billion people. So that's where the herd immunity comes in. I mentioned 40 to 60% of a population would need to either be vaccinated or have had the virus for a 2 to 3 year window to exist. But if the virus spreads faster than your traditional influenza virus, which is usually the one used for these herd immunity numbers, 80% herd immunity might be required to stop a pandemic. So we'll have to see, but herd immunity is what we're hoping for.
It's very interesting given what you were saying with regards to how we have to have a united effort as a planet to combat this kind of problem. Specifically, that without organized effort, it can't be solved. there's a question that was asked from Alex of St. Pete Beach, which relates to this question. It's a little earlier. Sorry, Alex, but here we are asking your question. The Baha'i Faith teaches that physical reality is a metaphorical representation of the next world, or the kingdom of God. What do you think is the spiritual significance of a virus or a pandemic?
Sorry, I missed the first part of the question. What is the metaphor?
He said that the Baha'i Faith teaches that physical reality is a metaphorical representation.
Right. Yeah, well, in a way you can think that, so what that means is, in my perspective, is that the world, the physical world, is a reflection of the spiritual world. So things which occur here have spiritual analogies. For example, the love, the physical connectedness, the physical love between people has a spiritual relationship as well. Things that you learn here, like honesty, like loyalty, it takes life on earth to actually learn these spiritual principles. So, and disease, which is a physical condition where cells become sick and die, or tissues, or so on. In the same way, we have spiritual diseases like materialism, which affect the soul and affect its happiness, which is a spiritual quality. So yes, this pandemic could very well be a physical sign of a spiritual condition where people are, the human race is not in tune with its spiritual oneness. And like I said, use the analogy of the body and the gangrenous foot. We have to make sure that we are treating the whole of mankind, not just to eradicate this virus, but also to produce the conditions which make the virus impossible, like justice, like universal healthcare, like universal education, like human rights, and so on.
Thank you for that answer. That is an amazing subject. And now I actually have a question of my own to follow up to this answer you gave. In terms of how you mentioned that these viruses appear in places that are typically ridden with socioeconomic issues, war and famine and whatnot, and given that Alex had mentioned about the spiritual reality underpinning all these things, my question is, what do you think in terms of the unity of this planet, where we recognize the oneness of humanity, we can address this problem in an organized manner that actually, for future pandemics, we could, in a very simple way, without society stopping as it has, do the same thing and combat this virus?
I think that will take an hour to go over. But
so that's another subject then for another class, right?
for
Another adult discussion.
Yeah, it would take a lot of time to address that, and it would require much more in-depth study of the writings and how they apply to the world. As my brother was saying yesterday about this virus could be looked at with the perspective of crisis and victory. That each time in history that we've had a crisis, we've had a victory, and sometimes one requires the other. It's true that this virus is a terrible thing, and it's going to cause a lot more suffering going forward, but hopefully mankind can use it and use the suffering that it caused and make lemonade out of it, make lemonade out of lemons, and therefore create a society that would be more resistant. There's a book by Nassim Taleb. It's called Anti-Fragile, and I like that concept. The concept of fragility means that if you are fragile, you are more likely to get hurt. If you are afragile, it means that you are resistant to getting hurt. But the concept of anti-fragile is that illness or injury actually makes you stronger. So you not only are resistant, actually you may get hurt in the process, but you become stronger and more able to handle other things. So hopefully our world, our human family, is more of this third type, anti-fragile. And this type of disaster will make us better, make us stronger, and prevent other things.
So a question was asked originally right when the whole presentation started, as you were introducing your class when you were studying. The question was by Miss Regina from America. Sorry, I don't know where she's from exactly. Were there Black Americans in your class?
Yes, there were many, yeah.
Okay, beautiful, beautiful. Sorry, Regina, for having you to wait so long.
Sure.
The other,
sorry about that.
Oh, from Huntsville. She clarified, she's from Huntsville, Alabama. All right. Another question that we had as to the origins of this virus. So, of course, we know the first known case was in Wuhan. However, as you correctly stated, we don't know exactly where it originated. So it could have originated anywhere, and the first time we picked it up was in China, right?
Right.
Okay, cool. That's a good clarification. Someone had asked questions regarding the origination of the virus.
Right.
So it is 12:28 p.m. and it's almost 12:30. So if you would like to give closing remarks, first, I just want to remind everybody that we had a presentation today at 11 a.m. in Eastern Standard Time. If you would like to join again, please come to clearwaterbaha'is.org, the website. Just sign in to clearwaterbaha'is.org by typing that URL into your browser. And the option to go to meeting, it's highlighted in green. You can attend the presentation the day of just by clicking on that one green highlighted icon. And that being said, you can call in. Some people I noticed have called in. And another item was the speaker next week. Mr. Gilbert Hakim has offered to be the speaker next week. He will be speaking, and the subject will be made known on that website and also on the Clearwater Baha'i Center Facebook page. So if you want to hear more from Dr. Bayat, he is very gracious to have appeared today, and we hope that we can have him again. If you'd like to ask some questions, please send questions via the Facebook and or the clearwaterbaha'is.org website. And please don't forget that this is a weekly discussion. We have different subjects that are related with Baha'i Faith, as the Baha'i Center of Clearwater hosts this, but they're also based off of issues that the viewers yourself want to hear. So please ask us questions, what you guys want as subjects that you would be wanting to attend for. Now, Dr. Bayat, I leave it to you to close.
Okay. Well, I just wanted to say thank you for giving me the opportunity. Thank you, John and Jeremiah, for making it technically possible. I really liked it. I'm sorry I may not have addressed all the questions. Feel free to send me messages. The world is suffering right now. Life is very hard with this social distancing, especially for social people, which we all are. And but hopefully we'll get through this. And the best way to do it is through unified action, through prayer, and through support of each other.